It's Christoffersen.
Correct.
Shannon Christoffersen is going to be, first of all, presenting on the Registry of Polar Observing Networks, ROPON, which is a product of SAON's Polar Observing Assets Working Group. And then later on, we're going to be moving into a workshop joint run by William Manley and Shannon, I believe.
Yes, so good afternoon. Thank you everybody for staying for today's workshop portion. So as Jonathan noted, I'm Shannon Christoffersen. You can see Bill Manley. And we have a few other members of POAG in the room today. Chantal Verhey, Jan René Larsen, and Taco de Bruin. So today I'm going to be giving an update on a collaborative effort to optimize polar observing through improved information sharing across observing networks. This effort is a bridge between the polar observing and polar data communities. I'm presenting on behalf of the SAON Polar Observing Assets Working Group, or POAG. It's led by Bill here with active participation by many others. So to help with this, let's go through our goals. Our goals are to make observing related information more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, to promote best practices for asset level metadata interoperability, and to reduce effort while showcasing and integrating multiple systems. To help with this, POAG was formed a few years ago under the SAON Committee on Observations and Networks, with the goal of making observing related metadata more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So if you are interested in helping out with that, you can sign up at polarobservingassets.org. We have monthly meetings and you can join that to stay informed. So broadly speaking, there is a recognized need for integrated polar observing system with a means of identifying strengths and gaps, a knowledge map to clarify directions, ways to build capacity to better meet observing goals. We also need to optimize limited resources by co-locating instruments, platforms, and otherwise streamline logistics or operational support. However, the challenge is obtaining a comprehensive perspective across a highly fragmented and distributed multitude of local to international efforts. At this time, it is difficult to assess status, conduct planning, or optimize resources without the level of granularity needed to do so. And this is just going to be a little bit at the start. We're going to explain about POAG before we get right into ROPON. So progress toward an integrated system, however, fundamentally rests on knowing which activities and assets are already in place, which can be difficult to track. Where are the gaps and overlaps? And how can we better plan and implement observing to meet scientific or monitoring objectives? In other words, how can we know where to go if we don't know where we've been, or even where we are now? So the challenge is obtaining a comprehensive perspective across agencies, programs, and networks, and at the international scale. The challenge of obtaining a comprehensive perspective across a highly fragmented and distributed landscape of dozens or hundreds of observing systems is tricky. At this time, it is difficult to assess status, conduct planning, or optimize resources without the level of granularity needed to do so. So as you can see, we've got a list of different polar portals up here. There's a here. So true, many observing networks and related organizations have built and shared catalogs of their observing assets for their own internal purposes. As we know, there need not and should not be only one portal, but almost all of these are defined by geographic or thematic scope, or by governance, or by funding, most commonly for individual networks. And there are many networks that have not shared catalogs of their observing or monitoring capacities, so that are for internal use only. The real challenge is a lack of interoperability with this information across networks. Many have or share details through custom metadata structures and vocabularies, reinventing the wheel each time, resulting in apples and oranges that are difficult to pull together and harmonize. Most do not share the information through machine readable access. For example, many simply present the information as a table on a web page or in a PDF. Finally, there is much duplicated effort with building asset catalogs from scratch. And this is a lot of what we've been talking about in this workshop to begin with, is that interoperability piece. So mismatch of content. This lack of interoperability leads to a mismatch across different implementations. Some fields carry across, no problem. Some are not quite the same, but feasible for harmonization, and others are problematic. And some have gaps on either side, requiring laborious backfilling when aggregating metadata records for broader perspectives. For example, a paper a few years ago looked at research site documentation across 6 ecosystem networks. These site-level catalogs commonly vary in the number of fields or elements that they include in their metadata records, thus differing in the level of detail available for harmonization or aggregation, and few networks adopt metadata standards or shared vocabularies. What would be very helpful is if observing systems shared basic discovery-level details about networks, projects, sites, and more speaking the same language and in compatible ways. Fundamentally, what we're talking about is observing related metadata. Each of these details listed here is a metadata element, sometimes as fields in a database, as elements in a metadata record, such as an ISO 19115 record, which most of us are familiar with, or just as columns in a spreadsheet. These are details that once aggregated or simply just accessible would form the basis for strategic assessment. So lessons learned. Fortunately, there are lessons to be learned from the broader polar data community, based on the progress they have made over the last decade with what could be called dataset level metadata. We can apply these same solutions, metadata standards such as ISO 19115, WIGOS, and others. Semantic technologies with code lists or controlled vocabularies to assist with search and aggregation. Transfer protocols for consistent access and federated search. But in this case, not for data sets and dataset level metadata, but for structured information about observing assets. Talk about POEG tasks. One is to create a registry of polar observing networks documenting asset-related metadata standards, semantic technologies, and transfer protocols in use. To build crosswalks and facilitate existing tools for translation across standards. And the third is to create recommendations for adoption and implementation of established solutions. So to help address these challenges, POEG has identified and is making progress on 3 tasks. Creating a registry of polar observing networks, focusing on interoperability parameters if they have a metadata catalog of assets. Building tools to facilitate harmonization across implementation. And creating a guide to make it easier for networks to populate, deploy, and share a catalog of observing assets. So this is ROPON, and we'll be going into this in more detail through the workshop. But we have just released a registry of polar observing networks, or ROPON, which is a catalog of catalog of systems and related organizations that coordinate or track observing activities and infrastructure at high latitudes with discovery level details. You can kind of see that here. This one has been released as a phase 1 version for demonstration purposes. Plans are underway as funding allows for improvements in functionality, interoperability, and scope, so tracking more networks. This registry was designed to facilitate discovery and integration across a multitude of local to international efforts. ROPON will help to co-locate and optimize limited resources, better inform local communities of activities nearby, guide network planning and assessment, make observing related information more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. As you know from many presentations, those are the FAIR principles. ROPON was created as a collaborative effort by the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks Initiative, represented here by Jan Renee, the Arctic Portal, and the SAON Polar Observing Assets Working Group. And the Arctic Portal did the majority of the work on the development here, which with great thanks. A metadata model for describing observing networks has also been released, and feedback is appreciated. You can check it out at polarobservingnetworks.org, but we're going to be taking a detailed look at it later on today too. Okay. I wonder if I can go into the ROPON view.
Do you want me to click on it?
Yeah, are we able to?
Yes.
That is an active link, yeah.
Navigate using that screen.
That's gonna be. All right, I'll figure this out. Okay. So Bill, do you just want me to click on Ropon?
Sure.
Yep, okay. Okay, this is gonna be tricky because I'm kind of looking at one thing and seeing another, so we'll see how this goes. So this is the Registry of Polar Observing Networks. Bill, am I supposed to go through this one or are you? I can't call.
It's up to you.
The agenda's way over there. It's on me? Okay, cool. All right, so this registry has been released, as I said earlier, as a Facebook. So we are actively looking for funding to expand Ropon. Right now, it has about, thank you, Jonathan, it has about 20 networks listed. So I am not super great.
We can navigate if you want.
Would you mind? We're just gonna scroll down a little bit, Jonathan, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can kind of take a look and you can see that there's a variety of different applications and databases in here. I'm actually gonna walk over here, if you don't mind navigating, Jonathan, because then I can see what I'm supposed to be going through. Technical difficulties with having multiple machines in different spaces in the room. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right, so as you can see, we've just gone through the homepage and you can see the different cards here that describe the different networks, for lack of a better term right now. If we go back up to the top, Jonathan, you can see that we have a few different filters. There's region, sub-region, domain, discipline, asset type, and asset catalog. If you want to maybe just click on region, Jonathan. So you can see we've got Arctic, subarctic, Antarctic, Southern Ocean, global. We've got a variety of different filters here. There is also a search. And if you click into the search bar, just click on it anywhere. There we go. Maybe just type in, well, type in Arctic as an example. Enter or the search button.
So a lot of them, at least the first two are Arctic, so it didn't change at the view
Yeah, so
there,
if
but
we scroll down.
Oh, I think the search was done. You could see it up there in the.
Yeah, so if you scroll down, you'll see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. So we've got a few Arctic ones here, but these ones are all either Arctic or global. And then if we scroll back up, maybe type in something small like BOEM, B-O-E-M. So you could also do a search and just bring up a very specific item. And let's just click on the BOEM one to go into it.
that's right.
Yeah, so if you click on each one, you'll get a little paragraph overview of the program. You'll get information, you'll get an abbreviation, a website, the regions that it covers, the sub-regions, domains, disciplines, the organization that runs it, if known, the year started, a contact information, and if they have one, a data repository. So it's all kind of listed there. At the bottom, as we scroll down, you'll also see it gives things like the transfer protocols, the metadata standards. So some of that can be extremely useful if you're looking to interact with it in that way. And then we'll just click along the top there, Jonathan, you can see there is about page. So that provides information about Ropon. We've got a contact card where people can reach out to us. And then we also have the FAQ. The POAG just takes us back to the POAG. Okay, just go over to that. And then the FAQ gives information on what is Ropon, an explanation of what the different observing assets that we track are. So sites, mobile platforms, projects, campaigns, initiatives. What is an asset level metadata catalog? Why we're created? Lots of good information there. Bill, do you want me to go through anything else? I think I covered all of it.
That's great.
Okay,
All good.
so we can go back to the presentation now. Yeah, we did.
Sync. Let me,
Anybody else notice that this happens anytime you try and switch between slide and active demonstration? It happens a lot too, I think.
It wouldn't be a demo without some sort of glitch.
Well, yeah, especially if you're in an IT or data conference. All right. And Jonathan. So observing assets. So here we are talking about observing assets as discrete individual components of in situ infrastructure. So this includes research and mooring sites such as stations, facilities, vegetation plots, moorings, super sites, etc. Mobile platforms such as buoys, ships, and more, as well as related activities. Scientific research projects, field-based campaigns and scientific cruises, and the overarching programs, networks, and observing systems themselves. So getting back to our definition for observing assets, this is how we started, by clustering the asset types as reported by 43 portals. The font size is proportional to the number of networks that use that term, for example, projects. And then you can kind of compare projects with sites, which is much, much smaller, difference in size. Take a look. These are the different asset types, and we've clustered them into sites, projects, mobile platforms, campaigns, and initiatives. Maybe not. There we go. All right. And we'll go back, and this is just that same screenshot again, showing what the different asset types are. So what is in ROPON, which is what we just saw? As you can see, we've got the observing networks, discovery tools. Observing networks are systems or organizations that coordinate or conduct observation and monitoring of climate or environmental phenomena, typically with data management and infrastructure, such as research stations, platforms, or instrumentation. And we've given as an example, CEOS, GTN-P, and NASA above. For discovery tools, we have portals or organizations that are not observing networks per se, file and share information about observing activities and infrastructure. So RMAP, the SAFIC, and the Polar Decks. And we're using discovery tools as an ad hoc term. And at some point, we'd like to have a discussion with this group as to what term is best to use. Is discovery tools the best one? We also have the options of asset level aggregating metadata catalogs, aggregators, catalogs, archives, inventories, directories, or indexes, or we can leave it implied but not explicitly defined, or perhaps somebody has a better term within the room. To populate the registry, we are building a metadata model for describing observing networks with elements that cover network information, observational scope, data access, spatial and temporal coverage, and metadata interoperability. And towards recommendations for organizations that wish to track observing assets, we're beginning to assess relevant metadata standards and schema.org markup profiles as well for various types of observing assets. You can see we've kind of clustered a few of them here. So for recommendations, we have a few with regard to ICART priorities, or more generally, these are encourage sharing of observing related metadata for station sites, projects, buoys, vessels, and more. Don't reinvent the wheel for observing related metadata. Use established standards and vocabularies when possible. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here in this room. It seems like we say that a lot. and take advantage of existing portals for observing related information, such as polar ducks, RMAP/AOB, DIMES, SPR, SAFIC, Interact, IARPIC, FO, CIOS, etc. I'm sorry if I mispronounced any of those. I'm not familiar with every single one. Outcomes. With slow but steady progress and participation by many individuals from both the observing and data communities, we anticipate that the outcomes will provide a basis for planning and integration, help make observing related information more fair, make it easier for individual networks or organizations to build, share, and deploy catalogs of observing assets. And thank you. We're going to get into, it says for more information, visit our short statement for the Arctic Observing Summit 2022, which is available on the POAG website. But, and that's listed here, we're also going to be getting into some of this in the workshop.